This is the nature of 21st century hog farming. Thousands of animals housed in huge drab buildings. In North Carolina, factory farming has created environmental disaster while driving thousands of small farmers out of business. The extinction of family farms has become a lightning rod issue for well-known American environmental lawyer Robert Kennedy Jr.
In North Carolina, 15 years ago, there were 27,500 independent family farmers raising hogs. Today, there are none. They have been replaced completely by 2,200 factories. 1,600 of those are owned by one company.
Farming in North America has become a cash cow for a handful of multinational corporations. Agribusiness has taken the principles of the assembly line and applied them to what was the bucolic art of animal husbandry. These massive and powerful corporations have created enormous wealth at the cost of the environment and rural culture.
This is not inevitable. This is not the result of economies of scale. It's the direct result of government policies in the United States and Canada that encourage the corporate takeover of the family farm and driving family farmers off the land.
Tonight, the first of two programs on modern agriculture. This episode examines factory farming. In recent years, large corporations have built huge animal factories that threaten the environment and create severe economic and social problems in rural communities. This program was made in the shadow of Canada's mad cow crisis that could result in the disappearance of thousands of independent cattle and sheep producers and create a further concentration of agriculture in corporate hands. This is the way it ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper. Like silent sentinels, dilapidated farm buildings keep an eerie watch over the changing rural landscape. For generations, independent farm families lived and toiled here. Today, there is barely half the number of farmers there were 50 years ago. One reason there are fewer farmers is the growth of corporate agriculture. Though fewer in numbers, when the warmth of spring spreads north, farmers take to the land. A family farm has been defined as one where the family provides most of the equity and labor. Most of the family farms in Canada grow cash crops like grains and oilseeds, or they keep cows and raise calves. These are the areas of agriculture that are too risky, too labor-intensive, and require too much equity for large corporations. Farmers are the heart of the rural economy. Each farm family creates 4 other jobs in related industries. For most, it is as much a way of life as a way to make a living. This is the Marsh family farm near Didsbury, Alberta. It's owned and managed by Murray Marsh.
I'm a third-generation farmer. My dad and his brother started this place. They grew up a couple miles away and farmed with their parents as they were kids growing up. Now we've got about 2,000 acres. It's a mixed grain and cattle farm. About 500 acres of grassland and forages and 1,500 acres of annual crops. In rough terms, I think it's an average size farm.
Like most farmers, Murray uses the most elaborate technology he can afford. He farms an area of land that 50 years ago would have supported 4 or 5 families.
When my dad and his brother started here in the 40s, they had a little 6-foot seeding tool, and they seeded 300 or 400 acres in 2 or 3 weeks, and now I can do that in a couple of days. It's industrialization as opposed to the labors of your body that my dad and his brother so seriously dedicated to this operation.
Murray is a modern farmer, but he maintains a traditional view of his relationship with the animals and the land.
The farm speaks back to you. You can look at the land, you can look at how the crops are growing, and if you've had cattle in a small area, the next year the crop shows evidence of over-nutrients. So if you can listen to the land as it shows you things, you learn and you don't do things that are detrimental.
Murray and his family face an uncertain future because there are plans to build a huge factory farm nearby. This was a moderate-sized beef feedlot. The owners want to expand it to house nearly 17,000 head of cattle.
Right now the feedlot has a capacity for around 6,000 head. They actually have an operating permit to be carrying 2,500 head of beef feeders, but they want to expand up to 17,000 heads, so you probably see nearly triple the size of pen space that's there now.
A cattle feedlot, like a factory, assembles all the components of a product in one facility. The animals produce tons of beef by ingesting massive amounts of feed, water, and minerals. It's not uncommon for feedlots to house 20,000 animals on 40 hectares of land. The feedlot is a threat to the Marsh family because of the impact it could have on their water.
So the concern is that the groundwater could be contaminated by these high concentrations. They're also using huge volumes of water. That operation, if it gets its approval, would use the same amount of water in a day as a town of 2,200 people. And yet we're supposed to not be concerned that our own water supplies might deplete.
The struggle between individuals like Murray Marsh and corporate factory farms is a battle that is being fought all across North America. Small-scale mixed farming is a closed biological cycle. Animals fed grasses and grains produce manure. Mixed with straw, the dry manure is spread on the land, returning nutrients to the soil. This was the primary source of fertilizer for growing crops. The plants were then cycled back through the animals. In a proper balance, the animals could not produce more nutrients than the crops could absorb. Though they were not benign, small mixed farms posed little threat to the environment. Farmers were exempted from many of the environmental laws imposed on other industries. Factory farms have taken advantage of these exemptions to establish their massive operations. Since the 1980s, pig farming has been almost entirely converted from small family operations to massive factory farms, owned or controlled by huge corporations. Some of the first pig factories appeared in North Carolina. The companies that own these drab, squalid sheds are among the largest and wealthiest in the world. Pig factories house tens of thousands of animals. Each sow can produce about 20 piglets a year. Antibiotics are routinely added to the feed to promote growth and to prevent diseases that would spread rapidly in the crowded, filthy conditions. Industrial pork is controlled by the companies that own the slaughterhouses. The company that owns this plant also owns the factories that produce 3/4 of the hogs grown in North Carolina. The company also owns the feed mills that bring massive amounts of grain from the Midwestern grain belt. The feed is blended and shipped out to the complexes where the pigs are born and grown. The companies can produce pigs at a loss because they make so much money in processing. In North Carolina, each pig factory has driven 10 independent farmers out of business. This industrial process makes economic sense for the corporations, but it has severe impacts on nature and human society. In North Carolina, the industry has developed with the blessing of government.
Government has a responsibility to enforce the laws and to protect the public trust. It's really the major function of government. But government doesn't do that. And the hog, particularly the pork industry, industrial pork, which is destroying family farms in the United States and Canada and destroying our culture and our democracies and poisoning our water and our air and treating animals with unspeakable cruelty.
There is no agricultural reason for pig factories to be located in North Carolina.
They locate in rural states, and usually the poorest states or provinces, where they can easily dominate the local political landscapes. And they come in and they buy off the politicians with campaign contributions. And the interests of the public is really sacrificed in those transactions. And democracy ultimately is sacrificed because they have to corrupt public officials in order to survive in the marketplace.
The hog industry is concentrated along the eastern coastal plain of North Carolina. Rick Dove is a riverkeeper, part of Robert Kennedy Jr.'s Waterkeeper Alliance. This organization employs people like Rick who act as an advocate for a specific body of water. Rick's river is called the Neuse.
This river runs about 250 miles from Raleigh-Durham out to the coast. It was named after the Nuseok Indians. The word means peace. It's had little of that since the Europeans arrived, and it's had none of that since the hogs arrived.
A short run in Rick's boat churns up evidence of the hog industry's environmental impact. The river is filled with it.
You know, most people think about growing hogs. They think about a farmer with 200 or 300 hogs, and he's growing crops that he uses to feed the animals, takes care of the animals are happy, the animals are content. He's raising them to be slaughtered. They're not pets, but the fact is that under a regular farmer, these animals get some decent care. But that's not what's happening here. These factories are set up in a way where these animals are confined inside the buildings. They're fed mostly by computer. Everything's pretty automatic in their watering and feeding. As they take food in, it comes out the other end. It goes through slatted floors, drops into a drainage pit, and then it runs out to what they call a lagoon. It's a nice name, but there are no girls in bathing suits alongside of these lagoons. These are cesspools, essentially. They're open pits, open to nature. They're outdoors. Some of them can be the size of 2 or 3 football fields. When those lagoons fill up, waste is taken out and it's sprayed through a number of different kind of sprayers, but all of them spray through the air. And the pretext here is that they're going to grow crops with this waste because it's high in nitrogen, high in phosphorus.
The industry handles waste as a liquid because it is the cheapest way to deal with it. The stench of this raw sewage is unimaginable.
If I live a mile downwind of it and drink a glass of orange juice, that orange juice is going to have the taste and odor of hog waste. People who fly in airplanes 3,000 feet above these facilities get sick. They get nauseous from the stench. Farmers who've been on their land for hundreds of years, they can no longer go on their front porch during the summertime. They can't hang their laundry. They can't plow the fields because they choke. These places are creating antibiotic-resistant bacteria. They're putting nitrogen in our waterways and poisoning them for everybody else. And they're putting all the family farmers out of business.
The industry calls its handling of manure world-class or state-of-the-art technology. The results have been horrendous pollution. Governments rarely enforce their own clean water laws, but under U.S. law, individuals can act when governments don't.
Almost all the rivers in the coastal plain of North Carolina have been destroyed by waste from the hog industry. So we're suing the big hog producers. And we just won a very important decision from a conservative Republican judge in North Carolina, federal judge, who said that this is not agriculture, and it's not entitled to the agricultural exemptions in the Clean Water Act.
The companies argue their handling of waste is simply part of the manure cycle, practiced for generations on small mixed farms.
A farmer may have 300 hogs on a 640-acre section of land, and he spreads the manure at agronomic rates. And as the corn grows, it assimilates the nitrogen, the phosphate, the potassium, the nutrients, and the other noxious components of the manure. So theoretically, it's not going to go into the water or the groundwater.
There may be 100,000 pigs in a factory farm.
Each one of those animals produces 10 times the amount of waste as a human being. So a factory with 100,000 hogs in it produces the same waste as a city of 1 million people. If you spread that waste on that 640-acre section, it's going to assimilate and absorb the waste of the first 300. And after that, every molecule is either going into the air, into the groundwater, or into the surface water. And what this judge said is, that's not agriculture. That is waste disposal, the same as an industry. And you're subject to the same legal obligations as an industrial discharger would be. You got to build a sewage treatment plant.
Riverkeeper Rick Dove is a lawyer and ex-Marine. Part of his work is gathering evidence for the lawsuits against the big corporations. He takes to the air because the companies deny access to anyone who doesn't support them. Rick has assembled hours of videotape showing how the companies handle their waste.
When the lagoons fill up, they'll do anything they have to do to get rid of that waste. We've got them spraying directly into wetlands, directly into streams, directly into ditches. And then sometimes when they're putting that spray in the air, they're spraying with winds at 20 miles an hour, and you could see this hog waste just being caught up by the wind and just sheeting across the fields and onto neighbors' property.
The result is a watershed that is so toxic that people wear protective clothing to touch the water or the fish. The nutrients generate massive blooms of algae that remove oxygen from the water, killing other plants and animals. The nutrients also produce blooms of toxic algae, such as an organism called Pfiesteria. It paralyzes fish by releasing a neurotoxin. The Pfiesteria then feeds on the fish's flesh and blood. When Pfiesteria is releasing toxin, millions of dead fish appear in the water and along the riverbanks. The pollution not only affects wildlife, it also attacks unprotected people.
Pfiesteria's main diet is soft tissue. That's what it goes after first.
Pfisteria is not the problem. Pfisteria is just a symptom of the problem. The problem is pollution. What we need to do is make sure that whenever we do anything, whether it's hog production or whatever it is, that we do it in a sustainable way that's in balance with nature. Once we try to do it driven by profits and greed and we disregard Mother Nature's rules, that's when your fishermen will get sick, people will get sick, your fish will get sick, your other wildlife will get sick. And then you begin to destroy the most valuable thing that our children have, which is their inheritance, which is the environment.
In 1995, what the industry said could never happen, happened. The walls of this huge manure cesspool burst, releasing tens of millions of liters of liquid manure. The spill was twice the volume of the oil spilled from the Exxon Valdez.
Here in eastern North Carolina, this is Hurricane Alley. We have hurricanes coming through here with wind and rain all the time. The fact is, Mother Nature does step in with weather events, and when she does, it's catastrophic. And we saw that during Hurricane Floyd. You could see the animals just outside, floating in the river, swimming in the river, dying in the river. I've got video with just one factory after another where the water is up to the top of the roofs and the animals are still inside. You could see the hog waste where the water went over the lagoons. You can actually see on the video the hog waste coming out of the lagoon and just streaming on down the river. You often hear the industry say, you know, we have the highest technology, we've got these lagoons and they're lined and they won't leak. Well, the truth is, from the studies that have been conducted at the University of Iowa and other places, that all lagoons leak, every one of them. Even the ones in concrete cracks, and all lagoons leak. The lagoons in North Carolina that they say are lined with clay cracks. What is the answer? The answer is to not have lagoons and spray fields. The answer is to have a functioning high-tech wastewater treatment plant.
If they had to build a sewage treatment plant, it would add about $1.25 a pound to the price of every hog at kill weight. So they can't do it. They can't do that and produce a hog cheaper or more efficiently than a traditional farmer. And the only way they can do it is by breaking the law.
Under fierce public pressure, the hog-friendly state government was forced to act. North Carolina placed a moratorium on any further construction of pig factories. Other states have also passed legislation limiting the growth of the industry. But the effects of factory farming have spread beyond the U.S. border.
Those agricultural methods that become standardized in the United States because of government policies that drive them, then also force our competitors, such as in Canada, to kind of go down the same path because they have to compete now with hog producers in the United States that are dumping all their waste into the local river.
Western Canada has a tradition of agriculture. Over the last century, the prairies have supported a rich rural culture. Today, huge feedlots and barns house millions of animals. Many believe these operations pose serious environmental threats. Murray Marsh is embroiled in a battle between traditional agricultural land use and factory farming. He's fighting the proposal to build a huge feedlot near his farm.
I've been embroiled in this for 6 months. In 6 months, I haven't had a lot of spare time because my spare time has sort of been devoted to defending my interests to continue living here with a quality of life. I'm about 3 miles directly downwind, and we smell a feedlot now on days when the wind's in the right direction, and it's unpleasant, but if it expands to 4 times the capacity is right now, I believe it will severely impact our quality of life. People will leave this community. The people that are near this operation right now will not be able to live there anymore.
The feedlot expanded illegally from 2,500 head to over 5,000. Then the owners applied for a permit to keep 17,000. Even at 5,000 head, the feedlot has created problems for nearby neighbors. This house is directly across the road from the back of the feedlot. It was built by Rick and Kathy Kelk. The proposal to expand the feedlot has put Rick and his wife through what others in a similar situation have called a living hell.
We were at a community meeting about a month ago, and one of the neighbors stood up and he said to me, the country's for agriculture, and if you aren't for agriculture, there's another place for you. And so my response to him was, I said, well, would you like to give me full market value for my house? And he didn't give me a response.
Rick and his wife planned and built their home when the feedlot only held 2,500 head of cattle. The house stands on land that was homesteaded by Kathy's grandparents. Kathy is blind and wanted to be close to her family for their help and support. The flies and smell from the feedlot are so bad that some days she can't even go outside.
We're concerned that it will affect our quality of life. We're concerned that we won't be able to enjoy our home outside or inside because we're not able to use even our air exchange system.
Kathy's father and brother live and farm nearby. Arnold McCullough has farmed all his life and had no problem when the initial 2,500 head feedlot was proposed.
They want to expand it to 17,000, 20,000. I don't know, who knows, maybe in another few years they'll want 40,000 head up there.
In arid Alberta, old-timers say whiskey is worth drinking and water is worth fighting for.
Water probably is one of the biggest threats, I think, of all. Contamination of runoff or into the soil. It won't bother us probably, but I have an idea that in years to come it'll catch up to us. It'll be our grandchildren that'll suffer the consequences, and once you pollute it, it's done. I think it's pretty hard to fix.
I'd like to be able to, I'd just love to be able to say that the government's corrupt.
In his efforts to stop the feedlot expansion, Murray has aligned himself with others who have fought similar battles.
I can't go around Red Deer and find...
Lana Love fought and won against a company that wanted to build a giant pig factory in her community. She won by raising local concerns that pressured local politicians to deny the application.
Some of the best soils peoples.
In 2002, the Alberta government changed the rules, taking most of the power away from local councils. Beginning in 2002, a provincial panel called the Natural Resources Conservation Board was established. The board receives all applications for farm expansion and construction. It also approves or denies these proposals. At the same time, the government passed an act that sets all the rules for storing and handling manure. Usually, if the company meets the criteria and obtains a water permit, the application is approved. This has made it much easier for corporate agriculture to expand.
The first thing they do when they go into the provinces of Canada is they say, we need a law that says that local people cannot object to the siting of a hog farm in our neighborhood. How do I know they do that? Because that's what they do everywhere they go. They don't want democracy. They want to deal with a couple of guys at the top. They don't want the public involved in this controversy.
I'm going to present our appeal today, and
The new process dramatically reduces the ability of local communities to stop the growth of factory agriculture. The Alberta Minister of Agriculture is Shirley McClelland.
It's interesting that the industry themselves were the ones that wanted those strong, clear rules. It was important that we go through the process that established a clear process so that people who invest in this, and these are huge investments, have some predictability and certainty as to what the rules and regulations of which they're going to operate will be.
Since taking control in 2002, the provincial panel has approved nearly 90% of the applications it has received. One of the approvals was for the feedlot near Didsbury. The residents appealed to the board but were denied. Their last appeal is to the Alberta Supreme Court. The court has agreed to hear the case. Rick Kelk has no illusions about what his house will be worth if the court rules in favor of the feedlot.
If it goes to 17,000 or 20,000, we're not sure of the actual number, we'd be looking at probably 50%, but whether you can even sell it, so.
Are not two sparrows worth a farthing? What is the value of individual rights compared to corporate profits?
There's that old expression, he who has the gold rules. The politicians are elected democratically, but it appears to me that the people that have the money dictate what the government is doing.
In Quebec, Ontario, and across the prairies, factory farms are proliferating. Governments are encouraging the expansion. Governments are also gambling that new technology will solve the social and environmental problems. Industry critics contend there is little difference between regulations in Canada and the United States, and that provincial eagerness to embrace factory agriculture is courting social and environmental disaster.
The attitude of the Alberta government, and you can see this in the oil industry as well, in the way that they lay down for the oil industry, is that we're going to treat the planet, we're going to treat the province as if it were a business in liquidation. We're going to convert our natural resources to cash as quickly as possible. We're going to have a few years of pollution-based prosperity. And you can do that. And you can, generate an instantaneous cash flow and the illusion of a prosperous economy. But the children of Alberta are going to pay for the joyride. And they're going to pay for it with denuded landscapes and poor health and huge cleanup costs that nobody's going to be able to afford.
In Ontario, the signature of industrial agriculture is appearing on the landscape. There is a proliferation of giant barns, and the stench of liquid manure is becoming increasingly common. Much of Ontario's expansion has been in the hog industry. The business is structured much the same as the U.S. industry. Huge pig barns house thousands of animals. Very few pigs are raised on small farms. The expansion of pig production in Canada has been almost entirely for export. Industry critics have said Canada is becoming the barnyard for the world. In Ontario, pig producers are represented by a commodity organization called Ontario Pork. The Director of Consumer Marketing for Ontario Pork is Jim Vidosky.
In 2001, we became the world's largest exporter of pork outside of the European Union, selling to themselves. And we're very proud of that.
If the wind's coming right from the north, I know that as soon as I open the door, pig smell. It's going to be a pig day.
Lawyer Valerie McGarry is called the Princess of Poo by her colleagues. She represents people like Tony James who fight against giant hog factories in their communities.
One of the cardinal rules for lawyers is you don't become friends with your clients. But I am friends with all of my clients in this area. Through no fault of their own, they're going through, a lot of them, a living hell.
The village of Keene is in southeastern Ontario. It's a quiet, tourist and mixed farming community. Valerie has come to Keene to meet Tony James because the company that owns this 2,500 head sow barn wants to build a second barn nearby. Large companies often use a few local farmers to act as their advocates.
I think there's about 160.
Usually, they are farmers who will benefit financially from the operation of the factory farm.
In my experience, you find that it's one of the major pork producers in the province that's come in and sort of is trying to drive this. The family farm is a front.
And most of this stuff gets eaten in the Far East. So this isn't stuff for the Canadian market at all.
The tactic that I've mostly experienced has been, let's see if we can't win this fight by attrition. We'll snow them with paper. We know that, we're dealing with ratepayers on the other side who find it hard to organize themselves and fundraise and get together the kind of money that a lawsuit, if that's what it takes, can involve. And so far, I haven't seen any evidence that the other side, when I'm dealing with it, has any shortage of funds.
Public meetings to fight corporate agriculture have become more common in rural Canada than fall fairs. They are often highly charged with frustration and anger over the threat to people's future.
How many hogs? How many hogs are going to be in this barn?
2,250.
They have very little land and a lot of manure, and it's in their best interest to pump it down the hill.
In order to make money in pigs, they've got to have thousands to make a dollar.
I think the point's been made. We're not talking people, we're talking dollars.
That's right.
We like to base our opinions on science. Emotion isn't conducive to getting to a good conclusion that's useful for people to live together as neighbors.
When people complain about the stench and the threat of pollution, industry spokesmen say they are simply following the rules.
These are huge investments. They're not planned lightly. So if there's a proposal made for a hog barn, we are certainly cognizant of the zoning regulations and the setbacks and the size and construction of the manure tanks and all the finite details. It goes against any kind of common sense to think that a farmer would pollute willingly the land he lives on, the land that sustains him, his family. So we have a lot of inherent motivation, as it were. These people live with their land, and they take it very seriously.
The company that owns this barn and wants to build a second is headquartered nearly 400 kilometers away near London, Ontario.
For those who don't know, my wife and I run a farm right beside this proposal. I would much prefer if it was a dump proposed. I immediately get property price protection. So what do we get?
Often the presence of a pig factory in a community dramatically reduces the value of neighboring properties.
The intent certainly isn't to diminish the value of the surrounding countryside. That's certainly not anyone's intent. And I can't speak to that because I don't really know. I don't have the facts and the figures to support an argument for that one way or another. I don't know.
Valerie has been successful in her battles against factory farms about 50% of the time. She is frustrated that innocent citizens have to go to such lengths to protect their interests.
My biggest frustration is with the government. When faced with all of the evidence of what's happened in the States, is what's happening in Alberta, what's happened so many places around the world, it's willful blindness and bordering on negligence. It's unfair to the people of this province. At lots of these
When factory farms appear in rural communities, there are enormous social, environmental, and economic costs that are not paid by the companies. The companies deny these costs, saying they are simply benefiting from the accepted laws of a free market.
In a true free market economy, you can't make yourself rich without making your neighbors rich and without enriching your community. What these hog operations do, and the cattle feedlots as well, is they make themselves rich. A few like billionaire meat barons are making themselves rich by making everybody else poor.
We continue to test our well water for fear of contamination.
They're making money by forcing you and I to pay their costs of production. We pay in diminished property values, in closed businesses, in lost tax revenue, in poor health that they inflict upon their neighbors, in the contamination of water supplies, in the destruction of fisheries, tourism industry, etc. All of those costs in a true free market economy should be reflected in the price of the pork when it gets to the marketplace. But of course, they are able to use political clout to escape the discipline of the free market and force the public to pay part of their costs of production.
The expansion of factory farming has come at the expense of small independent farmers, who through their work supported their rural communities. Mixed farms with an appropriate land base also have minimal impact on the environment. Factory farms cast a sinister shadow on the diversity of rural landscapes. Where they appear, they become a threat to individual freedom and democracy.
Can we actually have a democracy when you got so much money corrupting our political leaders? That's kind of the ultimate question that, history alone will answer. Is there enough leadership on the local level, and are there enough good people out there to ultimately put an end to this? And, I'm counting on the fact that there are, and I'm going to fight for it whether there are or there not, because, I think that's a worthwhile way of spending my life.
Though factory farming has created wealth and power for a few, there is a growing backlash to what many believe is an unsustainable form of agriculture. People are questioning the threats to the environment and society and challenging the ethics of viewing farm animals as machines.
Piggies!
Let's go, guys!
Marnie Cuff and Paul Eisenbarth call themselves ecological farmers. They raise rare breeds of farm animals like pasture pigs.
All a bit shy.
These animals have nearly become extinct because of factory farming and the emphasis on grain-fed meat. These pigs thrive outdoors eating grass.
One of the reasons they're so rare now is when you put the phooey. When you put them indoors on the commercial feed, they tend to be way too fatty. They need to be on a much lower protein diet. They're just suited for the outdoors like this. What a nice baby.
In Part 2, Food for Life, The Nature of Things examines alternative agriculture. There are growing concerns about the nutrition and quality of factory food. There is an expanding market for the products from small alternative farms. Organic, ecological, and ethical farming could become a benefit to rural society. That's next time on The Nature of Things.
Let's go. Oh, phooey. Don't be silly.
To purchase a transcript of tonight's episode of The Nature of Things, email us at tnot@toronto.cbc.ca.